Lesson 1.4 is going to review the four methods that we have for solving quadratic equations. And a quadratic equation is when you have an x squared. So in standard form, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. And then you have to have it set equal to 0 to solve a lot of these. The only one you don't have to have it set equal to 0 is the square roots and also completing the square. So factoring, you need standard form. Quadratic formula, you need standard form. Square roots and completing the square looks a little bit different. So we'll review a little bit of everything there. Let's start with the square roots. So to solve an equation in the form u squared equals d, without going through steps of factoring, because sometimes you can factor, that's called extracting square roots. I like to just say solving by square roots, but that's how this book references it. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides. So as a review, if we have x squared equals 4, and we take the square root of both sides, remember that when you take the square root, your answer could be a positive or a negative, and in this case, the square root of 4 is 2, because positive 2 squared is 4, and negative 2 squared, negative times a negative, is positive 4 as well. So that's why it's important that we remember to include that plus or minus whenever we take the square root. So let's go ahead and solve a couple here. Letter A, 4x squared equals 12. So we're going to divide both sides by 4 first. That leaves us with x squared equals 3. And then once you get that x squared by itself, we can take the square root of both sides. So we get x equals right away plus or minus taking the square root. And then in this case, the square root of 3 does not simplify, and it's not a perfect square, so we just leave it as root 3. Looking at letter B, if you have the squared outside of the parentheses, before we can move this minus 3, we have to get rid of the squared first. So to get rid of the squared, we take the square root of both sides. That eliminates the squared. So then we have x minus 3 equals square root plus or minus root 7. Now we can go ahead and add the 3 over. And when we add the 3 over, we're going to add it in front of the plus or minus. So our answer will look like 3, positive 3, plus or minus root 7. And then from here, you can split your answer into 2 decimals. We're going to go ahead and just leave our square root in our answer. If we had to graph this, we would want to write out the 2 decimal values to know where we would put our points on our graph. And I am going to add in a couple more here. So let's add a C and a D. So letter C, let's do 16x squared equals 25. Okay. So if we divide both sides by 16, now 25 we can't divide by 16, but both of those are perfect squares. So let's leave it x squared equals 25 over 16. And then when we take the square root, we take the square root of everything in the fraction. So we get x equals plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5, square root of 16 is 4. So if you get a fraction, that's okay. We just take the square root of the top and the bottom. Letter D, let's go ahead and do x plus 4 squared equals x minus 9 squared. So now here we have a squared on outside of both. So we're going to take the square root of both sides, but we have to include a plus or minus somewhere where we're solving. So what we do is these are going to cancel, the square root and the squared, so we get x plus 4 equals, and then we'll do plus or minus. Here the square and square root cancel, so we get x minus 9. So here we're going to go ahead and make 2 equations. We're going to set up where we have x plus 4 equals a positive x minus 9, and then an x plus 4 equals a negative x minus 9. And then we're going to solve those 2 equations, one positive, one negative. So here we just have x plus 4 equals, and then this is a positive, so this stays x minus 9. And then if you solve, you'd subtract x, and you'd be left with 4 equals negative 9. And that's not true. This is false. So this does not supply us with a solution here. We don't get any good information here. Over on the other side, we have x plus 4 equals, we're going to distribute that negative x plus 9, and then we would add an x over. So x plus x is 2x, and then subtract the 4 and divide by 2. And it's okay if you get a fraction here. So our x value is 5/2. Okay, so when you have that squared on both sides like we did up here, one of them when we solve, we have to include that plus or minus. And I always just include it on the second side.